Well, welcome everyone to another edition of Taking Stock Live. And I'm really excited for today's discussion. Today we have someone here on the screen who I consider at this point a friend, someone who I got to see really through his evolution of joining Microsoft and go from being really a leader in the financial services industry with companies like Bank of America and Citibank, to coming over to Microsoft and obviously leading our financial services industry vertical globally, but then also being a real leader and advocate for Blacks at Microsoft, or BAM. So I am really excited to have Bill Borden here, our Corporate Vice President of Financial Services, to talk about all of those things. And Bill, just a huge warm welcome to you to this show.
Happy to be here. Shelley knows that I will always join anything that she asks me to join, because actually Shelley was one of the reasons why I'm at Microsoft. She was part of my interview process when I was working for DevCup, and I just enjoyed our conversation. And I was calling you on a conference call. I was in Mexico City at Bank of America at an event, and I called you, and we chatted. So I couldn't remember if you remember that, but I stole away from my meeting in Mexico City so I could talk to you. So
if I had known that, Bill, I would have asked you to have me down for a margarita. I forgot. I definitely remember. I think it was an interview, but I had heavy instructions not just to interview you, but to recruit you.
Yeah.
So I usually start this out actually because it's largely a retail and CPG talk on what someone's first job in retail was. But given that I don't think that was your first job, Bill, maybe let's start out what was your first job, maybe outside of obviously the retail or consumer goods industries.
My first real job was a buddy of mine and I started a lawn mowing service. We actually tied our lawnmowers behind our bikes and we rode around and we did lawns in the neighborhood. We actually had a pretty good little business. Then my real jobs, my dad was in construction, and so when I got to like 8th grade and into high school, he was in road construction. So summers meant that I was getting up early at the crack of dawn and going to work with him on his construction site job. So that's when I found out about real construction labor. And I said, I'm going to go be a white collar worker.
That's incredible. So here you are at Microsoft, and we'll talk a little bit, obviously, about what you're doing in financial services. But first, before we go there, I know that you are a tireless advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I like to consider myself someone who passionately believes in that as well. So maybe will you start there and talk a little bit about why you're passionate about it and sort of how that shows up in your work at Microsoft?
Yeah, being an engineer, being in tech, going to business school, working in financial services and working technology, there aren't a lot of people that look like me, right, in the space. And so, starting in it and seeking out people that were in the space to get a perspective around their careers and their thought process and, how they became successful. And as I, grew in my career and had an opportunity to have more outsized influence around that, it's always just a big part about, how I've thought about making the companies that I work for better by ensuring that we have a broad perspective of talent, that are thinking about product, building products, serving our customers, living for our customers, and serving, the communities in which they serve, which is serving a broad set of people. And so when I joined Citigroup in 1998, and about 3 or 4 years into my career there, I actually had a chance to start Citi's first African-American employee resource group. And so being a sponsor of that and creating that and seeing the environment and seeing the energy and the passion and the excitement around the organization, around how that kind of took off and grew to something that was quite large was big. And so I always viewed that as part of doing it. And then outside of work, I've always tried to be involved in community service and organizations as well that do mentoring and career development, and try to present myself as somebody who's in these industries that you can do it. And then when I joined Microsoft, part of my interview process was I had a ton of questions in the HR group, and I learned about BAM, Blacks at Microsoft, and the fact that it was the first ERP group at Microsoft and had a rich history and impact on the company. I was very excited. So I said on day one when I joined, I would shortly figure out how to be a sponsor. And so that's how I became an executive sponsor here. And I think it's important. It keeps you grounded around what's happening, right? When you hear such diverse perspectives across the community around what's real, what's meaningful, what's going on, not just about the company, but what's going on externally in communities. And importantly enough, what are customers thinking? Because they're working with customers every day, and they're working with customers that look like me every day too, many of them. So I just view it as a really fulfilling experience, and I've learned a ton.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I think what you said, I know I feel the same way of sort of when you get to a certain moment in your career and you look around and there aren't as many people who look like you. Some might say, well, that's frustrating, but also I have the same perspective of like, well, how do I leverage where I am and the people who help me along the way to do more within the company, and then to your point, going out into the community and doing more, so that you inspire in some way. Hopefully, you realize that people are looking and watching you, and if you can do more of it, sort of just the outsized impact it can have. So maybe when you think about the opportunities that you see around diversity, equity, and inclusion, either like specifically within Microsoft and BAM or just in the FSI, financial services industry, what are some of the things that really stand out to you?
Yeah, look, when I was in financial services itself, right, it's the blood of what we do, right? It enables individuals and small businesses and entities and governments. It enables them to actually finance what they're trying to do their careers. And so the idea of it being inclusive and open and transparent, and the history around how financial services in the past had not been open and transparent. And even today, the issues around inherent biases around the banking community and the insurance and risk management community in terms of how minority populations may not be getting the same set of full services or the opportunities around those services is really important to me. So when I was in industry, it was always kind of top of mind around if I'm at a bank, how am I having an impact on how the bank is doing, but also am I getting involved in things that drive how we think about products or how we go to market, how we think differently, or how we are expansive or how we're inclusive in terms of the products that we're delivering to the market. And I had a chance to work on consumer products and business products and corporate products, and deal with those issues of community lending and why it's important, and why the government is pushing for measurements around it, and how institutions try to game those measurements, because financial services companies, they're very good at doing analytics and figuring out how to optimize every loophole you possibly can. And so how do you get the organization not to do that and actually just do the right thing? And think about it, something very simple, right? Think about Bank of America back in the day. Remember, in banking, right? You got charged a fee for everything, right? If you change something, if you overdraft, if you did fees for everything. And guess what? When fees are everything, then who's the hardest hit by those fees? It's usually the minority populations that are usually hardest hit by those fees, just because of the nature of their understanding around using these tools and the financing of it. Well, over time, Bank of America realized that by taking the fees away and making their products more usable and more accessible and providing more education, they've actually made more money.
Wow.
After they got rid of the fees. And these were billions of dollars, right, that they were toying with, right? How can we give up these fees? How can we make it? They've made more money on top of that because their customers are stickier. They brought more balances in, and they realize that, no, it's not about feeing to death. It's about how do you provide the right product and service and loyalty and expertise around knowing them as a customer to drive a long-term relationship from when you're young in college and high school to all the way up when you get a family, to when you have to educate and finance for college, or when you want to start a small business. So that to me was really exciting, right? That It's not all about just thinking about the financial bottom line. It's when you do things right, typically there's a business model there too. And that's why inclusiveness and expansiveness around that's really important. And then now coming to Microsoft on the flip side, right? One of the exciting things about coming out of an industry that you see a lot can happening, but you also know that the industry is super slow because they're highly regulated, they're highly conservative, right? They're about managing risk. And so the pace of change is really slow and hard. particularly
Yeah.
for the more mature organizations. And that's why there's so many fintech disruptors. But the reality of it is still the big banks still own the majority of the population of financing. Same with insurance companies and same with capital markets companies. So coming over on this side, it's, wow, how can I impact change at a greater speed? And that's been the fun part, right? How are we talking about these institutions and how they transform, think about their products and services and relationship development quickly, and how do we actually help them with time to market? Because we have solutions that can actually get them there. And that's really cool about being on this side of the ledger, right, if you will, serving the industry. So excited to be here doing it.
And do you think when you were making those changes sort of in terms of lending practices, or even as you think about at Microsoft, what tends to be your approach? Are you, data driven? How do you convince people? Because I think one of the things I know I think about for myself and I hear from others is, how do you sort of advance that agenda so it doesn't just feel like, sort of your personal agenda, but where's, like, to your point, where's the business going and the business opportunity?
Well, look, like most industries, it's about the data sets you have and reasoning in them to really create value, right? And financial institutions have always sat on mountains of data. The question is that they've been able to bring them together and actually do something with it and actually reason on it, and then start to apply AI and those types of things around lending and other things. And that gets us into responsible AI. So some of the conversations that we have around responsible AI from our perspective at Microsoft and how we think about using it, particularly when you think about lending, right? That's the easiest use case that you think of, right? Great example, right? When Apple launched their credit card in partnership with Goldman Sachs, right? They were going around, I don't know if you remember the story, they got in trouble, right? Because their algorithms were, and it was written up, right? That same household, so application gets sent to Bill Borden, and I'm in a combined household, and Bill Borden gets approved for the card. Same application gets sent to Bill Borden's wife, same household income, Bill Borden's wife gets declined. So people are like, wait a minute, how's that working? So
Right.
Clearly there was something with their algorithms around how they were looking at their credit risk and how they were looking at their credit decisions, and they actually got written up for it. So, but that again, those types of, now that's thinking about it more in the broader terms, but now start to apply that when you get into minority communities and how even more dicier that gets, right, around how you think about credit decisions and lending decisions, right? So all those things around responsible AI and the discussions around that across data and how you're going to reason over your data and how you get your environment ready to actually do that are all, that's where the fight is right now going on, how we're going to compete for that, right? As you feel it in your industry too, right, in terms of competing for the data estate. There's more pressure as it is in retail too, right? Banks have always thought that their golden goose was their data, but in reality now, when they look at the amount of they have compared with the amount of data that AWS and Google and other big entities have on their same customers, now they're realizing that, oh, now we're really in trouble, right? We really don't have as much data on our customers as we thought to be competitive, and that's why there's so many bank startups, because so many bank startups can find data on Shelley Bransten and start to create a profile and start a business. So you hit the head, right? It's around data, and then how do we think about data, and how do we think about reasoning, and then how do we think about not getting into situations where it becomes non-inclusive, right? When you think about product decisioning or where you decide to put a branch location or things like that, right?
Fascinating. Yeah, I mean, and to your point, it's very similar in retail where you have fintech. They haven't named it retech or anything like that in retail. But to your point, there all a lot of the innovation that's happening in this whole direct to consumer, whether it's the Dollar Shave Club or you name it, is because people looked at the data and figured out more personalized experiences or products. But retailers have been sitting on that data for years. They just hadn't brought pieces together. They were using historical data versus, as you're saying, some of these AI techniques to actually figure out not where things had been, but where the market was going.
Yeah, and where the market is going, and serving underserved markets can be profitable, right? So that's the biggest thing, right? So many still today in minority communities are still unbanked, right? They're not either being pursued by financial institutions, or they are in the mindset where it's easier for me just to try to figure it out on my own. And that's a problem. And the industry itself, as you know, there's, depending on the region of the world, there's this big push to how do you deal with the unbanked, and how do you understand how to get products and services to them, and how do you do that in a responsible way, right? And still protect yourself and make money, but still serve them in the way they need to be. And my retailing example of that is I love my Magic Johnson story, right? With Starbucks, right? Magic Johnson went to Starbucks and said, if you put Starbucks in Black and brown communities, which you're not putting any right now, you can sell and make money in Black and brown communities, right? Even at a higher price point. You just need to do it with products that are a little bit different, right? And so, he talked about, right, the type of he said Black and brown people, they like lemon cake, so put lemon cake in there. So I love that story, because it's all about these big companies saying that come to where the people are and give them what they want, and you can make money. And so it's the same thing in financial services.
I had never heard that story, Bill, about Magic.
Oh my gosh, go look that story. That's why Magic partnered with Starbucks and became very close with them, and then opened up a bunch of Starbucks in Black and brown communities in California, and proved that Starbucks can be super successful in city Black and brown communities.
Wow, that's a great one. Thank you. I will look it up.